lot to talk about this morning, from the president's takeover of D.C. police to the upcoming negotiations with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. For more insight on all of that and more, we're joined by News Nation contributors Mick Mulvaney and Chris Cillizza. Hey, guys, thanks so much for being here.
Morning.
Morning.
Everybody.
Hey, Mick, let's start with you with this D.C. crime crackdown. We know that D.C. numbers show that crime is actually down. We know that contrary to what the president says, this isn't the worst crime. That really goes back to the early 1990s. Why do you or don't you think this is necessary?
I mean, there's a couple quick responses to that, and then we get into it with Chris. Number one, it's coming down. It's trending in the right direction, but it's coming off of a peak. There's no question about that. You look at the historical numbers. You go back to talk about the late 80s, early 90s. I live there now some of the time, but I lived in the district back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was horrible. And I think a lot of folks were concerned about moving back in that direction. I mean, the bottom line is this. Is that more and more people were feeling less safe. DC, look, anybody who's lived in DC knows there's always neighborhoods that are not safe you don't go into. Everybody knows that, okay? I think what you've started to see in the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe since COVID, that the boundary lines for that sort of activity have disappeared. And that you're no longer safe at Union Station, you're no longer safe. There was a story last year about a gentleman carjacked and shot to death, I think at 14th and New York Northwest. That's a part of town that everybody would say is ordinarily safe. So it was sort of the bleeding out of the areas that everybody knows are bad into sort of the entire city. And I think that creates a lot of difficulty. So be curious to see how it's received. Be curious to see how the 30-day deadline goes and how Congress talks about it. Curious to see how the Democrats respond to it. Of course, they hate it because it's Donald Trump. But I will be curious to see how they discuss the topic, because it is something I think that's important to people across the political spectrum.
Hey, Chris, do you feel similarly? How do you see this?
Well, Hillary, I think the hard thing, politically speaking, for Democrats to argue is to say, well, look at the data. Crime is down. But to Mick's point, it's down, but it's not nothing, and it's down from a very high place. I just think you have to figure out ways, if you're Democrats, you have to figure out ways to make this about fights that you have more likelihood of winning, politically speaking. And I don't think they have a ton of likelihood of winning this. Like, you guys used that quote from Chuck Schumer that they'll fight tooth and nail if Donald Trump tries to push beyond the 30-day extension. I mean, the issue with that is, number one, it looks like you are fighting on an effort to bring crime down in the nation's capital. And two, if Chuck Schumer believes that this is all an attempt by Donald Trump to distract from Jeffrey Epstein, well, you're just helping that if we're going to have a long debate about whether Donald Trump can continue beyond 30 days to take over Washington. So it's a very fine line to walk. I know Democrats don't like this. I know the Democratic base believes this to be sort of, part of Donald Trump's authoritarian nature. I just think you have to be careful about fighting political fights that your opponent is much more likely to win than you are.
So, Chris, to that point, do you think some Democrats have maybe learned a lesson going back to the last election where the numbers said the economy was doing okay, but people didn't feel like it was doing okay? The numbers may say crime is down, but people don't feel like crime is down. And is that maybe why you're seeing these Democrats sort of try to walk that fine line? We don't like what the president is doing and how he's done it. But yes, more officers on the streets are going to make us safer.
Yeah, Corey, I always make this comparison. So everybody knows intellectually that plane travel is safer than driving your car, right? Everybody knows that. The last time I looked at it, it's like 1 in every 2 million takeoffs and landings of a plane is there a fatal crash in commercial airlining. I mean, the chances are minuscule that you are going to die in a plane crash. But when you are up at 32,000 feet and there's the pilot says, hey, folks, we're going to be experiencing some turbulence here, and the plane starts shaking, you don't think like, the data is insufficient to calm you down, at least if you're me or most people, I think, right? And I think that's the reality here. Data is data. I get it. I agree. Crime is down across the board from where it was last year and from where it was in 2023 in Washington. But the data alone doesn't solve sort of how people feel. And I think Democrats do, to your point, Corey, do need to understand that a little bit better. Yes, how you feel is anecdotal. Yes, it doesn't trump the data. The data is the data. But again, it is about how people feel. And Democrats being on the side of, well, I mean, crime isn't as bad as it was, isn't just as great a great place to be politically speaking.
In terms of how people feel, we can talk about homelessness because there are a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with it. Sometimes it leads to more crime. But again, it's a very difficult situation in terms of how you grapple with it. Mick, the president is talking about possibly shipping people out, citizens of the District of Columbia, to other places, perhaps institutionalizing them. Do you think that's heavy-handed, or do you think that's just what we need?
Listen, you're right. It's a difficult situation. There's probably are some people living on the street who need to be in institutions. You don't, I mean, spend a couple of days walking around Washington, D.C., especially, as I mentioned, up on Capitol Hill, and see the people who are there, who are living on the street. Some of them should be in institutions, but that's not a silver bullet that solves the problem. The biggest issue, of course, is that people are homeless because there's no place for them to live. And that is a longer discussion for another day about what we've done nationwide on not allowing affordable housing to be built. There's not a lot of affordable housing in Washington, D.C. Those are local policies that have come to fruition now after 2 and 3 generations of not building enough housing for folks at the bottom of the economic scale. I don't know how Trump is going to solve that overnight. Anytime you do clear out a homeless encampment, you always wonder where the people go. They go someplace, but I have no idea where they go. The reason I always thought that they were there in the first place was that they had no place else to go. So look, it's a tricky situation. I don't think Donald Trump is going to be able to wave a magic wand and make it go away entirely. He may lower its sort of visibility in the high-profile parts of Washington, D.C., may solve parts of it, but this is a longer discussion. It's not going to be handled by one executive order, that's for sure.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about this big meeting in Alaska between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Mick, we dug through the archives and found a picture from 2019. It's the G20 in Osaka, Japan, of Vladimir Putin meeting with Donald Trump. I want to ask you, for somebody, and you see Mick there on the right side of your screen, what is it like prepping Donald Trump for such a high-stakes meeting like this?
So I mentioned that shot last night on the Hill with Blake Berman. I said I think I'm just outside the frame, and I was. So thanks for digging that one up. I'll send it to Blake. It's not. Look, different presidents are different. I've talked to other chiefs of staff, and when Barack Obama would say go into these meetings, he'd take it as sort of like going into the bar exam. He'd study up, he'd read for 4 or 5 days, wouldn't talk to anybody else, sort of like cramming for an exam. It's not how Donald Trump works. Donald Trump would, on the flights over to the meeting that's in Osaka, it's a long flight for us, he'd be bouncing ideas off about how to go about this. He'd be asking folks what they know about the folks they're going to meet with. Keep in mind, Osaka, I think we met with a dozen different foreign leaders in like 2 days. And then on the way back, we stopped off at the DMZ to meet with Kim Jong-un. So it's a packed weekend. But there'll be a good bit of prep from the State Department. Chief of Staff will probably have a great deal of input here, and the intelligence community will likewise be involved. And I think Witkoff will probably be on the plane if he doesn't even just meet them in Alaska, because he's been the one meeting most recently with the Russian counterparts.
So, Chris, we have a little bit of time left. You heard everything Mick had to say about that. What would you have to add? Do you have any fears about what's going to happen, or are you positive he could actually get something done?
Oh man, I wish I had a good answer to that. I mean, Hillary, I think the reality of the situation is these are two incredibly unpredictable people in Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And by the way, they revel in their unpredictability. I think both of them view their unpredictability as a great strength and part of the reason for their success. So I don't anticipate either of them becoming less predictable in the next 48 hours. But I think that makes it really hard to know what to expect. Mick's exactly right. Donald Trump's going to have the briefing books, and he's not going to be, he has the ability to be prepared in a way that a traditional president would be. I suspect he will not prepare in a way a traditional president will be, because I think ultimately for Donald Trump at least, and I can't speak to Putin's intentions, but for Donald Trump at least, I think this is about his trust in his gut, his trust in his ability to look across the table and decide whether Vladimir Putin is serious about peace, is willing to make some sacrifices for peace or not. And that Trump has tremendous trust in his sort of ability to suss that out. And 1,000-page briefing books from the State Department ain't going to tell him that. And he is convinced that they're not going to tell him that. So it's sort of that's why I think it's so hard to know what happens, because ultimately it's an interaction between two unpredictable people who have very high opinions of themselves with massive geopolitical stakes.
I know somebody who used to brief him occasionally and said he never looked at the briefing books. Anyway, guys, Mick Mulvaney, Cillizza, thanks so much for being with us.